Hello again. I'm Iris. Welcome back to Buddha Bites. A couple of months ago, my friends invited me over for dinner, and I had it in my head that I wanted to bring a cherry pie. So I went to the produce market, and lo and behold, there were no cherries to be found. So I thought, what am I going to do now? So I looked around in the fruit section and I found pears in abundance. So I thought to myself, make a pear tart. I had never made a pear tart before. So I went online, I found a recipe on a website called Taste of Home. And I followed it and it turned out really beautifully, I think. There were a couple of little tweaks that I wanted to make down the line, but it ended up being a great recipe and I'd like to share it with you today. So I do recommend that the first time you try a dish to follow the recipe to the letter. Later on, you can see what works, what doesn't work, tweak it, and go on from there. But it's a good place to start, and I would like to give you my version of the Taste of Home pear tart recipe. Now, it starts out with 3/4 of a cup of all-purpose flour and 1/3 of a cup of walnuts. Now, don't worry that it's sort of more than 1/3 of a cup. When you burr it down, it's gonna balance out. And then you add to Old Faithful food processor 1/2 cup of granulated sugar and 3/4 of a cup of regular old cinnamon. We're going to burr that in Old Faithful. Get it going to the point where it looks like the ingredients are well incorporated. I think that's a good place to stop. And then we're going to add 3 tablespoons of unsalted butter. Now, this is different from what the recipe says. The recipe says that you start out with chopped walnuts, but I discovered as I was chopping the walnuts that when I tried to put them in the pie shell, they really didn't turn out so well. It gave an inconsistent product. So I like using the food processor, and you'll see that we're getting this to the consistency where you don't see the butter anymore. And the butter is at room temperature. Everything so far is at room temperature except for the walnuts. Remember, we keep the walnuts in the freezer. And we now have a consistency of what appears to be like wet sand. And this is our pie crust. So we're going to take this off. We're going to offload some of our stuff. I'm going to hold on to a measuring cup, and you'll see why in a moment. There we go, get in there. And we are finished with Old Faithful for now. I swear this food processor is so good to me. I feel guilty that I'm waiting for it to go to the great beyond. So we will take this mixture and empty it into a tart shell, which I have already sprayed with nonstick spray. Now you may recall from before I said be very careful about when you use nonstick spray. Generally, you can use nonstick spray on pans that are not the highest quality, generally. And this is actually in the instructions that you spray it with a nonstick. And this is one of those tart pans that has a bottom that pops out, that helps you to release the final product a lot more easily. Now, I have this measuring spoon because it is going to help me to press this into the crevices. Now, the first time I made this, I spent a lot of time pressing down the bottom. And when it came time for me to cut the tart, it was actually difficult to cut because I had muscled the pie crust into the bottom so hard. Where I really need to muscle it a little bit is the sides, because you need the sides to be stable enough to hold up once you unmold the tart. So I am concentrating using this wonderfully sloped measuring cup on getting a substantial amount of this crust along the fluted edges. And I'm tucking it in where it's overflowing a little bit. And you know, there are a lot of times that a recipe doesn't necessarily tell you all you need to know. This is the sort of thing that I found out after I had made this tart a couple of times. So you don't want these holes, so just be sure that you cover that up as best you can. And again, move most of the excess to the sides. And then press it in a little bit. So I still have a little bit that I need to move toward the center, but you'll see as we go around the fluted edge, there's some areas that have a little bit more crust than others. We can just coax some of the extra out where we need to, and coax it over to the places where we actually need a little bit more. So here is your pie crust that is ready for the filling. I'm just gonna rinse off a little bit, and we're gonna take this, shift it over. We are finished with Old Faithful for now. Now's the time to make our lovely cream cheese filling. So for that, you need cream cheese, which is here at room temperature. It's 8 ounces. And you know, you really could, say for instance, if you had the time or an extra food processor, you could do this step in the food processor also. I am not going to take the time to do that. And I also wanted to take the opportunity to show off, yes, I have a purple KitchenAid. I had to. Yes, I have a white KitchenAid. It's right over here, but I found this, and don't judge me. So we're going to take room temperature cream cheese. Now the recipe says non-fat or low-fat cream cheese. My feeling is we're making a dessert. Unless you have a real problem with the fat content, to me, I think it's worthwhile to go for the full fat. So we're going to break this up a little bit in my stand mixer. Just a little bit. Gradually bring it up. We're going to stop for a moment. That was 8 ounces. That was just your standard package of cream cheese. And to that, we add a 1/4 cup of granulated sugar. And send that around a little bit until it gets incorporated. It really blows my mind how easy this recipe is. It does not take that long. We're doing this in real time. So just a little bit of combining and a little bit of scraping down the sides, because even the best stand mixer doesn't get into the corners the way that your spatula can. And to that, we will add one of my beautiful eggs. So what we do, anytime you're putting an egg into a recipe, you want to break it into a bowl instead of putting it directly into the rest of your mixture, because just in case you get shells, you have the opportunity to pull them out before they go into the big mixture. So we're going to add this single egg. It really isn't that many ingredients to our mixture, and we will beat that to combine. After which, we're going to lower it a little bit and add 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. I use a lot of vanilla extract. I tend to eyeball it. And the way I feel about vanilla extract is the same way that I feel about garlic. If it says 1 teaspoon, I always do 2. 1 garlic clove, I always do 2, 3. It's the aroma that it imparts and the flavor that it imparts. I'm not stingy with vanilla extract. And another thing, don't use the imitation stuff. It's nasty. It's made with stuff that you don't even want in your system. And just pay the extra couple of bucks, get the good stuff. So we have our mixture ready to go. So we will release this. And, you know, I truly believe that the best utensils in your kitchen, in spite of all the wonderful things I have, are your hands. So we're finished with the paddle attachment. You actually could also do this with the whip attachment. The whip attachment would get a little bit more air into your filling, which you don't necessarily need. This is the whip attachment that I'm talking about. But you can use it. You can maybe, just reduce the speed of your stand mixer a little bit if you're going to use this. But the paddle attachment that I used is just fine. And we're going to take this off. Thank you very much to my Purple KitchenAid. We're going to scrape this down a little bit and do a final little incorporation of all of these ingredients. And you see, again, this is not a lot of filling. And there are some lumps. It's okay. You don't need to worry about getting all the lumps out, because this is going in the oven and the lumps are sort of going to melt away anyway. So we take this cream cheese mixture and we pour it into our prepared pan. Get as much of it out as possible. There we go. And you may be wondering, yes, it's still a little on the lumpy side. It really doesn't matter. You'll see. Just spread it out all along the bottom, not really up the sides, just along the bottom. And one thing that will help you, make sure that you don't let your spatula touch the bottom of this pan. Keeps a neater product. That's also a good tip to follow in terms of frosting a cake. The moment you let your spatula touch the cake is the moment that you introduce crumbs into the equation, and you don't necessarily want that. So here is your filled shell, and this is a pear tart, but we have not mentioned pears yet. So I am going to temporarily shift this over and introduce to you the pears. Now, Taste of Home's recipe says to use 1 15-ounce can of pear halves. And the first time I made this, I was awfully glad that I bought 2, because it took me exactly 2 of these to fill up the pie pan. So keep extra on hand. You never quite know until you open the can how large they're going to be. But this time I had a little bit more time. So I poached my own pears. And how did I do that? I took some fresh pears and I put them in a poaching liquid with a cinnamon stick, cloves, cardamom. I had some ginger from the last time that we got together, so I threw some ginger in there. About 3 cups of liquid for 5 pears. And I just poached them until they were softened, and this is what we came up with. So I am going to show you how to make these beautiful slices. So I'm going to grab my paring knife. Now, this is not terribly easy. What you want to do is you want to go, I cut off both ends of this pear. You want to leave the top end as much intact as possible, and you slice very thin slices on a curve. You see this? And I say it's not particularly easy to do because I don't know if it's just my eyesight, but it's kind of difficult to keep track of where you sliced because the pear is so light. But you see how this fans out like this? So what you want to do is to do this as many times as you need to. I'm going to slice that a little bit. Keep the fan intact as you set these aside, so you can choose which pears you'd like to use, which ones are the best for the position that they're in. So we go back to our prepared pan, and these, and I've messed around with this and made mistakes before. Take the fanned out part, the wider part, and set it on the outside. I have found that it's easier to start on the outside. I pre-made a bunch of these. It just works better to start from the outside and then work your way in. So I had just enough of these. Oh my gosh, how well can this work? Let's take another one, fan it out, because it's the fanning out of the pears that's going to make it bake really, really beautifully. And then we'll take the center, and there might be some smaller pieces that kind of came apart. That's a wonderful opportunity to take these, and that's for the cook. And you can just mess around with it. There's a little bit of open space there. I have a couple of little pieces here that I think I'm going to just fan out this way. Isn't this pretty? So, wash the hands again. And we're going to get to the part that makes it look extra special. So, the recipe said to take a tablespoon of additional granulated sugar, along with 1/4 teaspoon of additional cinnamon. I upped it because I found that I wanted more to play with as I garnish this. So we mix the sugar and the cinnamon together. You know, the same sort of a mixture that you would make cinnamon toast with. I used to love cinnamon toast as a child. Every little once in a while I think about it and I'll make myself some cinnamon toast for breakfast. Same mixture. So we'll take this mixture and we will sprinkle it on our beautiful pears. And it doesn't look like much right now. I mean, actually I do. I think it looks, actually I'm not telling the truth. I think it looks tremendous, but it doesn't look like what it's going to be. But when this gets in the oven, and when the juices of the pears bubble up and make a syrup out of this cinnamon sugar, you see why I made extra. This was not a tablespoon and a 1/4 teaspoon. Okay. Look at this. So you see how this is, how the granulated sugar is looking rather granular here? I found when I made my last one that when I took it out of the oven, some of the granules still showed. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to take some of the leftover poaching liquid from poaching the pears in the first place, and I'm going to very gently tap out. Not going to spread it all over the place because I don't want to disrupt the cinnamon sugar all the way. I just want to dab it onto our tart. And I also don't want to necessarily get the tart too wet, but these pears, as I cut them in advance, they were sitting out for a little while and they dried out a little bit. So this puts a little bit more moisture back into the pears. So we are now ready to take this gorgeous tart and put it in an oven that has been preheating at 425. We're going to put it in for 425 for 10 minutes. After the 10 minutes, we are going to reduce the heat to 350 and cook it for another 15 to 20 minutes. Then we'll let it cool for at least 2 hours on a wire rack, and then refrigerate it at least 2 hours before serving. Now, we don't have that kind of time, so of course I have one that I already made before, and let's take a look at it. All right, so I have been teasing this pear tart on my Facebook page for months, and now we finally get to look at it and cut into it. So this is our beautiful finished product. You see that the sides held up well. I'm sure that the bottom is wonderful. I've now done this a couple of times, and it just thrills me. So we're gonna gently cut with a serrated knife. This is where the rubber meets the road. I'm just going to do one center cut that doesn't go all the way. And we're going to make a substantial slice. This is where I tend to get nervous about what comes up. The first slice is always the hardest. Okay, bingo, we got it. And ease this out. Oh, the pie gods are on my side today. So that is our gorgeous pear tart. You see the cream cheese filling and the nice soft pears with the spice topping, and a good pie or tart deserves a good drink. So I am going to make a champagne cocktail. Just going to use, for me, a dry champagne, or Prosecco is good, whatever it is that you like. And again, I'm not drinking alone. So we take a couple of sugar cubes. Now, these are turbinado sugar cubes, so they're a little rougher looking than your standard white sugar cubes. I love them. So you put one in the bottom of each glass. I love the sound that makes. By the way, my sister gave me 8 of these over a decade ago. I have moved so many times, and knock wood, I haven't lost any of these champagne flutes, and they're so beautiful and so delicate. Yeah. So you take Angostura bitters. This is a proprietary blend of herbs by appointment to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. May she rest in peace. And you put a couple of little shakes. Ooh, now see, this is the dangerous part. This particular one, the little shaky shake thing, was loose. So I am going to rely on my good common sense to put a tiny little dab in each glass. Not too much. And then top it off with our champagne. Now the thing about pouring champagne, sparkling wine is that you always want to start one, move over to the other. Let the bubbles calm down. And now we have two gorgeous champagne cocktails, which is one of my new favorite drinks. I think this goes beautifully with the pear tart. So, here you go. This is a wonderful dessert. It goes over well at potlucks or at your own dinner party. And I'm gonna just give a little taste right now because I did all the hard work. This is so wonderful. Please do try this. Picture's worth 1,000 words, but no, taste this. And we will have some champagne cocktail, to wash it down. And I leave you to it. This is Iris Fairfax for Buddha Bites, reminding you, if nobody else reminds you today, you are the Buddha. Cheers.